He spent 15 years building the CIA's most classified programs. He caught terrorists. He ran operations in countries that don't appear on any official map. And then one day, he looked at what he had built and decided it needed to be destroyed. John Kiriakou was one of the most decorated intelligence officers in CIA history. He knew where the black sites were. He knew what happened inside them. He knew the names, the methods, the lies told to Congress, and the documents ordered destroyed before anyone could read them. In 2007, he made a decision that ended his career, took his freedom, and changed American history. He told the truth. The government's response was immediate. They didn't prosecute the people who ran the torture program. They prosecuted the man who exposed it. This is the story they tried to bury. And it starts in a room you were never supposed to know existed. Before John Kiriakou became the man the CIA wanted to silence, he was the man the CIA trusted with its darkest secrets. Black sites are not prisons in any legal sense. They have no addresses. They appear on no government budget. Prisoners held inside them have no legal rights, no access to lawyers, no ability to contact anyone outside. They exist in a legal void, designed specifically so that whatever happens inside cannot be prosecuted, investigated, or even officially acknowledged. Kiriakou knew exactly where these facilities were located. He knew which governments had agreed to host them in exchange for payments that also appear on no official budget. He knew the names of the contractors who designed the interrogation protocols, and he knew that the methods being used inside those facilities had been specifically prohibited by United States law for decades before September 11th changed everything. The file that started everything was stamped with 3 words that should have kept it buried forever. Black site. Eyes only. What those 3 words covered was a network of secret detention facilities operating across at least 8 countries simultaneously, none of them officially acknowledged, all of them funded through budget lines so deeply buried inside the intelligence community's classified appropriations that even most members of the congressional oversight committees had no idea they existed. Kiriakou had direct knowledge of these facilities because he had been inside them. He had seen the conditions. He had read the interrogation logs. He had signed off on transfer orders that moved prisoners between locations in the middle of the night on unmarked aircraft. And he had watched as the legal justifications for everything happening inside those facilities became increasingly impossible to defend against any honest reading of American law. The cargo planes that moved prisoners between black sites left no official record of their flights. No flight plans filed with civilian aviation authorities. No passenger manifests. No customs declarations. Aircraft registration numbers changed between flights. Tail numbers were switched in hangars at military airfields, specifically to prevent tracking. This wasn't improvised. This was a system built deliberately to move human beings between secret locations without leaving any paper trail that could later be subpoenaed by a court or demanded by a congressional committee. Kiriakou understood this system because he was part of it. What he didn't fully understand until later was that the same institutional infrastructure designed to hide prisoners from oversight was also being used to hide the program itself from the American public, from Congress, and from the international legal bodies that would have immediately classified what was happening as a war crime. The memo that authorized enhanced interrogation techniques used language so carefully constructed that it took legal scholars years to fully decode what it actually permitted. Enhanced interrogation authorized. 6 words. Behind those 6 words sat a list of specific techniques, each one defined in clinical terms that stripped away any emotional recognition of what was actually being described. Sleep deprivation measured in hours. Stress positions described geometrically. Waterboarding framed as a controlled procedure with specific parameters. The language was designed to make the unacceptable sound procedural. Kiriakou had read these memos. He understood what the language meant in practice because he had seen the practice. And he understood something that the people who wrote those memos were counting on nobody outside the program ever understanding. That the gap between what the documents described and what actually happened inside those rooms was enormous. The flight that took the first high-value detainee to a black site departed from a military airfield that officially recorded no departures that night. The prisoner was transferred in restraints, hooded, sedated, loaded onto an unmarked aircraft by personnel whose names appear nowhere in any surviving document. The destination was a facility in a country whose government has never officially acknowledged its existence. Kiriakou knew the details of this transfer because transfers like it were standard operational procedure, repeated dozens of times across multiple years. What made this transfer different was what happened at the destination. The interrogation that followed produced the first public controversy about CIA methods, a controversy that Kiriakou would eventually find himself at the center of, not as the person who authorized the interrogation, but as the person who finally told the public it had happened. The destruction order came in 2005. 92 videotapes of CIA interrogation sessions, recorded at black sites, documenting in precise visual detail exactly what enhanced interrogation techniques looked like in practice, rather than on paper. The order to destroy them came from inside the CIA's clandestine service. The tapes were fed into an industrial shredder at a CIA facility. The people who gave the order knew that congressional investigators had already requested any recordings related to interrogation programs. They destroyed the tapes anyway. This was not a rogue decision made by a mid-level analyst. This was a deliberate institutional choice made by senior officials to destroy evidence that Congress had specifically requested in a proceeding where destroying such evidence constituted obstruction. Nobody was ever charged. The tapes are gone. What they showed will never be officially known. The moment John Kiriakou walked into that television studio in 2007 was the moment the CIA's carefully constructed wall of secrecy developed its first visible crack. He went on camera. He confirmed that waterboarding had been used on a high-value detainee. He said it worked. He said it was torture. And he said that the people who authorized it had made a decision he believed was wrong. That interview lasted less than 10 minutes. The consequences lasted the rest of his life. Within days, the CIA's Counterintelligence Center had opened a file on him. Within months, federal investigators were examining every communication he had made since leaving the agency. Within years, he was sitting in a federal courtroom facing charges that carried a potential sentence of 30 years for the crime of confirming to a journalist that a program the government would later officially acknowledge had actually existed. The indictment against John Kiriakou accused him of leaking classified information. What it did not mention was that the information he was accused of leaking described conduct that multiple legal scholars have since characterized as criminal under both domestic and international law. The people who designed the enhanced interrogation program were never indicted. The people who authorized it were never indicted. The people who destroyed 92 videotapes of it were never indicted. The one person the Department of Justice chose to prosecute was the man who told the public it had happened. Kiriakou's lawyers argued this selective prosecution was designed not to protect national security, but to protect the careers and reputations of the officials responsible for the program itself. The judge ruled against them. Kiriakou pleaded guilty to a single count and was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. The prison gate closed behind John Kiriakou on February 28, 2013. He was the first CIA officer imprisoned in connection with the torture program. He was also the only one. While he served his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania, The officials who had designed the program he exposed continued to collect government pensions. Some of them received promotions. One was later nominated to lead the CIA itself. The Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the torture program, finally released in 2014, confirmed that the program had been far more extensive and far less effective than the CIA had told Congress. The report was 6,700 pages long. The version released to the public had more than 90% of its content redacted. John Kiriakou read it from inside a prison cell. The people it described read it from their living rooms. What Kiriakou saw inside the CIA didn't break him immediately. It accumulated. Operation after operation. Memo after memo. Transfer after transfer. Each one individually justifiable inside the institutional logic of post-September 11th intelligence work. Collectively, they built a picture that he could no longer look at without recognizing what it actually was. The CIA he had joined was an agency that operated within limits. The CIA he worked inside after 2001 had decided that limits were a luxury it could no longer afford. That decision was never put to a vote. It was never debated publicly. It was made in classified meetings by people whose names most Americans still don't know, and implemented by officers like Kiriakou, who were told that the legal justifications had been reviewed and approved. The justifications, it turned out, had been written specifically to approve whatever the program already intended to do. The Senate hearing where CIA officials testified about the interrogation program produced one of the most extraordinary exchanges in the history of American congressional oversight. Senators asked direct questions. CIA officials gave answers that were technically accurate and substantively misleading. They described the program's legal basis without mentioning that the legal opinions justifying it had been written after the program began, specifically to retroactively authorize techniques that had already been used. They described the program's effectiveness without disclosing that their own internal assessments had repeatedly questioned whether the intelligence produced was accurate or actionable. They described congressional oversight without mentioning that the briefings provided to oversight committees had omitted the most operationally significant details. Every statement made was defensible. The picture they painted collectively was false, and everyone in that hearing room who knew the truth said nothing. The polygraph examination is the CIA's primary tool for ensuring that its officers are not leaking classified information to unauthorized parties. Kiriakou had passed dozens of them during his career. The polygraph does not detect lies. It detects physiological stress responses associated with certain kinds of deception and certain kinds of people under certain kinds of conditions. The CIA knows this. Its own technical assessments of polygraph reliability are classified. What is known from declassified documents is that the agency continues to use the polygraph not primarily because it reliably detects deception, but because the process of undergoing it, the questions asked, the implications of certain responses, functions as a powerful psychological tool for managing the behavior of people who hold classified information. Kiriakou understood this. What he didn't understand until later was that the same institutional machinery designed to manage his behavior was already being turned toward a different purpose: building a criminal case. The vehicle that arrived outside John Kiriakou's home on the morning of his arrest was unmarked. The agents who stepped out of it had credentials identifying them as employees of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The charges they carried related to communications made years earlier, reconstructed through records obtained from phone companies, email providers, and intelligence community databases through legal processes that Kiriakou had no knowledge were underway. The investigation had been running for 2 years before he knew it existed. During those 2 years, federal investigators had built a case file documenting his contacts, his communications, and his statements in meticulous detail. The same institutional resources used to track terrorists had been turned toward tracking a former CIA officer whose crime was telling a journalist that a program the government later officially confirmed had actually existed. The document that proved the CIA had lied to Congress about the torture program was 6,700 pages long and took 5 years to produce. It was based entirely on records the CIA itself had generated: internal cables, emails, meeting minutes, and operational reports that the agency had not expected anyone outside its own chain of command would ever read in combination. When Senate investigators read them in combination, the picture that emerged contradicted almost every public statement the CIA had made about the program since 2001. The program had not produced the intelligence officials claimed it had produced. The techniques used had been more extreme than officials had described to oversight committees. The legal reviews cited as justification had been conducted after the fact, and the destruction of the 92 videotapes had occurred after congressional investigators had specifically requested any recordings related to interrogation activities. Every one of these facts was in CIA's own documents. None of them had been voluntarily disclosed. The black sites didn't close when their existence became publicly known. Some of them transitioned to different operational purposes. Some transferred their populations to other facilities. Some simply stopped appearing in any document that could be obtained through Freedom of Information requests, which is a different thing from ceasing to exist. Kiriakou's knowledge of specific site locations, personnel assignments, and operational protocols made him valuable to journalists and dangerous to the institution that had employed him. The CIA's position, maintained consistently across multiple administrations, is that disclosure of classified information about intelligence sources and methods causes grave damage to national security, regardless of whether that information describes legal or illegal activity. Under this framework, exposing a war crime is treated identically to exposing a legitimate intelligence operation. The classification system makes no distinction between the two. The lawyer who represented John Kiriakou in his federal criminal case spent years arguing that the prosecution was fundamentally about protecting the people responsible for the torture program from the accountability that public disclosure of their actions might eventually produce. The government's position was that the case was about the law, that classified information cannot be disclosed to unauthorized parties regardless of what that information describes. Both things can be true simultaneously. The law Kiriakou was prosecuted under does not contain an exception for disclosures that expose illegal government conduct. That absence is not an oversight. It is a feature of a classification system specifically designed to ensure that the government retains control over what the public knows about its own actions, including actions that would be criminal if performed by anyone outside the institutional framework that classification protects. Inside the federal correctional institution, where Kiriakou served his sentence, he had time to read the documents that were slowly becoming public as a result of court orders, congressional pressure, and the kind of persistent investigative journalism that his own disclosures had helped make possible. What those documents showed, piece by piece, was that the institutional picture he had described from memory was, if anything, more conservative than the reality the documents confirmed. Programs he had known about peripherally were more extensive than he had realized. Techniques he had been told were used sparingly had been used systematically. Legal justifications he had been assured were solid had been constructed specifically to authorize conduct that existing law clearly prohibited. He read all of this from a prison cell, while the people whose conduct the documents described remained at liberty, collecting pensions, giving speeches, and in several cases continuing to hold positions of authority inside the national security apparatus. The files that would complete the public record of what happened inside CIA black sites between 2001 and 2007 are still classified. Some of them exist in the Senate Intelligence Committee's full 6,700-page report, of which less than 10% has been released to the public. The remaining 90% sits in classified storage, accessible to a small number of cleared individuals, protected by classification designations that show no sign of being lifted in the foreseeable future. Other files exist in CIA operational archives that have never been subject to any declassification review. The people who know what those files contain include current and former CIA officers, congressional staff members with appropriate clearances, and a small number of lawyers who have worked on related litigation under protective orders that prevent them from disclosing what they learned. The public record is a fragment. The complete record is locked behind walls that have survived every legal and political challenge directed at them so far. This is where the story arrives at the present moment, and the present moment is more unresolved than 30 years of official reassurances should have allowed. The CIA's Black Site program has been officially acknowledged. The Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation has been officially completed. John Kiriakou has served his sentence and been released. And yet the officials who designed and authorized the program have never been charged with anything. The videotapes documenting what happened inside those sites have been destroyed, and nobody has been prosecuted for destroying them. The full Senate report remains 90% classified, and the infrastructure that made the black sites possible, the legal frameworks, the budget mechanisms, the operational protocols, the network of foreign government partnerships, has never been officially dismantled. What was built between 2001 and 2007 was not a rogue operation. It was an institutional capability. Institutional capabilities do not disappear when the political winds change. They wait. John Kiriakou walked out of federal prison in February 2015. The CIA officers who designed the program he exposed walked out of their offices with full pensions. That asymmetry is not incidental to this story. It is the story. The United States government made a deliberate institutional choice about who would bear the consequences of what happened inside those black sites. It chose the man who told the truth over the men who committed the acts. That choice was not made by accident. It was made by prosecutors who understood exactly what they were doing, advised by officials who understood exactly what outcome they needed, in a legal system that provided exactly the tools required to produce that outcome. The message sent to every intelligence officer who has witnessed government wrongdoing since that day is precise and unmistakable. The institution will protect itself before it protects you, and it will use every legal tool available to ensure that protection holds. The congressional oversight system that was supposed to prevent programs like the CIA's black sites from operating without accountability failed at every level. The intelligence committees that should have been informed were given briefings designed to create the appearance of oversight without its substance. The members who asked difficult questions were told the answers were too classified to share in any setting where staff members were present. The staff members who might have pushed harder were denied access to the operational details that would have told them what questions to ask. The system did not fail because the people inside it were corrupt. It failed because it was operating against an institutional opponent that had spent decades learning exactly how much information it was legally required to share, and exactly how to share it in ways that technically satisfied oversight requirements, while revealing nothing of operational significance. The question Kiriakou has been asked more than any other since his release is whether he would do it again. His answer has been consistent. Yes, but differently. What he means by differently is that he would have taken steps to protect himself legally before speaking publicly, would have consulted with lawyers who specialized in national security whistleblower law, would have used the channels that theoretically exist for reporting classified wrongdoing through official rather than public means. What he has also said, in less quoted portions of those same interviews, is that he has no confidence those official channels would have produced any different result. The Inspector General offices that are supposed to handle classified wrongdoing reports operate within the same institutional culture as the agencies they oversee. The Congressional Intelligence Committees that are supposed to provide independent oversight have demonstrated repeatedly that their primary loyalty is to the continued functioning of the agencies they nominally supervise. The CIA headquarters building at Langley has a lobby wall inscribed with stars, one for each officer killed in the line of duty. The names behind most of those stars are classified. The circumstances of most of those deaths are classified. The operations that led to those deaths are classified. This institutional culture of secrecy, built over 70 years for legitimate reasons of operational security, also creates the conditions under which illegitimate programs can operate without accountability. You cannot have a system that is completely opaque to outsiders and also expect that system to reliably police its own conduct. The two requirements are structurally incompatible. The CIA's history demonstrates this incompatibility repeatedly, from MK Ultra to COINTELPRO to the black sites. The same pattern: a secret program, institutional protection, eventual exposure, official acknowledgement, no accountability, and then another secret program. The Senate Intelligence Committee's torture report confirmed something that Kiriakou had said from the beginning and been officially denied for years. The enhanced interrogation program did not produce the intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks. The specific claims made by CIA officials in the years following September 11th that waterboarding had produced actionable intelligence that saved American lives were examined against the operational record and found to be false. The intelligence attributed to enhanced interrogation had either been obtained before the techniques were applied, been obtained through conventional interrogation methods, been inaccurate, or simply not existed. The program that cost the United States its reputation in international law, that produced the Abu Ghraib photographs that became recruiting tools for terrorist organizations worldwide, that put John Kiriakou in federal prison, did not accomplish what its architects said it would accomplish. That finding is in the official record. Nobody has been held accountable for it. The empty Senate chamber where accountability should have happened sits unchanged. The hearings were held. The witnesses testified. The reports were written. And then the political will to pursue consequences evaporated in the face of institutional resistance from an agency that has spent 70 years learning exactly how to make accountability disappear. Every administration since 2008 has faced the same choice: pursue criminal accountability for the officials who designed and authorized the torture program, or protect the institutional relationships and operational capabilities that those officials represent. Every administration has made the same choice. The reasoning offered has varied, looking forward, not backward, protecting ongoing operations, avoiding the appearance of criminalizing policy disagreements. The result has been identical each time. The people responsible remain unaccountable. The institutional culture that produced the program remains intact, and the capability to run a similar program remains available to the next administration that decides the legal constraints are inconvenient. The burned documents tell a story that no surviving file can tell completely. 92 videotapes, destroyed in a CIA facility in 2005. The people who ordered their destruction knew congressional investigators had requested any recordings related to interrogation activities. They destroyed them anyway. The Justice Department investigated the destruction and declined to prosecute. The reasoning: insufficient evidence that the destruction had been intended to obstruct the specific congressional investigation underway at the time, as opposed to a general desire to eliminate operational security risks. That reasoning has been criticized by legal scholars, former prosecutors, and members of Congress as a standard of proof that would make it nearly impossible to prosecute any government official for destroying evidence. The tapes are gone. What they showed, the actual visual record of what enhanced interrogation looked like in practice rather than on paper, will never be part of the official record. That absence is itself a fact about what they contained. Here is where the story stands in the summer of 2026, and the distance between where it stands and where justice requires it to be is as large as it has ever been. The black site program has been acknowledged. The torture report has been partially released. John Kiriakou has served his sentence. And the officials responsible for the program, for the destruction of the evidence, for the lies told to Congress, and for the prosecution of the man who exposed them, have faced no legal consequences whatsoever. The institutional capability that made the black sites possible has not been dismantled. The legal frameworks that authorized enhanced interrogation have been suspended, but not repealed. The classification walls protecting the most sensitive operational details have not been lowered. And a former CIA officer testified before Congress in June 2026 that the temptation to replicate programs like this one still exists inside the intelligence community. Not existed. Exists. Present tense. In 2026, the evidence box that holds what remains of this story is sealed in ways that may never be fully opened. Classified operational files, redacted committee reports, destroyed videotapes, the names of foreign governments that hosted black sites, the identities of contractors who designed interrogation protocols, the full list of individuals detained, transferred, and subjected to techniques that the United States government's own documents now acknowledge were torture. All of it sits behind classification walls, court protective orders, and the simple practical reality that the people who know the most have the strongest institutional and personal incentives to ensure that what they know never becomes fully public. John Kiriakou told a fraction of what he knew and spent 30 months in federal prison. The lesson that teaches every other person who knows more than he did is not subtle. It is the most effective classification system ever devised, not a stamp on a document, but a sentence in a courtroom. And this is the line that should stay with you after this video ends. Not a classified document, not a redacted report, a statement made in public, on the record, by a man who spent 15 years inside the most secretive institution in American government, who saw what it does when it believes nobody is watching, and who paid for telling you about it with 30 months of his life. John Kiriakou has said repeatedly in interviews that continue to this day that what he saw inside the CIA was not the work of rogue officers acting without authorization. It was policy, approved at the highest levels, implemented systematically, concealed deliberately, and never fully dismantled. The black sites are officially closed. The program is officially over. The capability is officially suspended. But suspended is not the same as gone. And the man who knows the difference between those two words spent 30 months in a federal prison cell, while the people who built what he exposed went home every night to their families. The file is not closed. It is waiting for the next administration that decides the law is inconvenient. And when that happens, the first thing they will do is make sure there is no John Kiriakou left to tell you about it.